The cottage at the edge of Millbrook Village leaned slightly to one side, as if perpetually bracing against the next storm. Rain dripped through 3 separate places in the roof, each with its own strategically placed bucket. Eleanor Walsh knew precisely when to empty each one. The rear corner filled fastest after a heavy downpour, while the one by the hearth collected drops with musical precision, 1 every 7 seconds. A bit of damp never hurt anyone, Eleanor told Mrs. Thornberry, as she wrapped the elderly woman's arthritic hands with salve-soaked bandages. Besides, I've lived in worse. Mrs. Thornberry clicked her tongue. That cottage wasn't meant to last through another winter, Eleanor. You know my son has space in his new addition? Just say the word. Laner smiled, the expression warming her. Tired face, but not quite reaching her eyes. At 34, grief had etched fine lines around her mouth, though her hands remained steady and sure a nurse's hands that had delivered babies, set broken bones, and closed the eyes of the departed. And deprive you of complaining about my stubbornness? Never. The truth was, Eleanor couldn't bear to leave the last place she'd shared with Thomas. 2 years since the logging accident had taken him, yet sometimes she still heard the echo of his boots on the porch steps, still reached across empty sheets in the night. The cottage might be crumbling, but it held memories in every worn floorboard. After seeing Mrs. Thornberry home, Eleanor made her rounds through the village. Millbrook was small enough that everyone knew everyone, and small enough that the village couldn't afford a proper doctor. Eleanor, with her nursing training from the city hospital, had become their lifeline. She checked old Mr. Finley's blood pressure, delivered Mrs. Camden's heart medication, and stopped by the school to examine little Ginny Pearson's suspicious rash. You work too hard, Olivia Bennett, the schoolteacher, and Eleanor's closest friend, remarked over tea that afternoon. When was the last time you did something for yourself? Eleanor stirred honey into her cup. I do plenty for myself. Like what, patching that roof again? It's not living, Ellie. It's enough, Eleanor replied quietly. There are people who need me. Olivia reached across the table, her hand covering Eleanor's. Thomas would want more for you than this. Want you to be happy? Familiar ache bloomed in Eleanor's chest. I am happy helping others. But later, as darkness fell, and she returned to her empty cottage, Eleanor couldn't ignore the hollow feeling that expanded in the silence. She lit the fire and heated soup for one, as she had countless times before. The wind whistled through cracks in the window frames, and somewhere in the rafters, a mouse scurried across wooden beams. Eleanor wrapped herself in Thomas's old sweater and sat by the fire. Medical journals spread across her lap. She'd need to visit the Hammond farm. Tomorrow their youngest had a fever and then check on the new mother at the east end of the village. Her days were full of purpose, even if her nights were empty of companionship. Outside, the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, dusting the dying garden where Thomas had once planted sunflowers. Eleanor watched them through the window, wondering how many more winters the cottage would stand, how many more she could bear to face alone. The snowstorm arrived with unexpected ferocity, transforming Millbrook into a world of white within hours. Eleanor stoked her fire higher and double-checked her medical supplies, knowing that bad weather often brought accidents. She'd just settled with a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice when a pounding at her door startled her from the familiar words. When she opened it, snow swirled in, along with a man she'd never seen before. Well-dressed, despite being covered in snow, and clearly not from Millbrook. My car, he managed through chattering teeth, skidded off the road about half. A mile back, your light was the only one I could see. Come in before you freeze, Eleanor said, ushering him toward the fire. Let me look at you. The stranger's expensive wool coat was soaked through, his leather shoes ruined by snow. As he removed his scarf, Eleanor noticed a nasty gash on his forehead. You're bleeding, she said, already reaching for her medical bag. Sit down. I'm Richard Harrington, he said, wincing as she examined the wound. I was supposed to reach the Bradford Inn by nightfall. Eleanor cleaned the cut with practiced efficiency. You're about 8 miles short and in the middle of the worst storm we've had this season. I'm Eleanor Walsh. Are you a doctor? Richard asked, watching her capable hands. Nurse, she replied. The village's medical lifeline, as some call me. She worked. Eleanor became increasingly aware of how out of place this man looked in her humble cottage. His watch alone probably cost more than everything she owned. When she finished bandaging his head, she offered him tea and soup, which he accepted gratefully. "You live here alone?" he asked, glancing around at the sparse furnishings, the strategically placed buckets, the patches in the curtains. "No," she replied, the familiar pain flickering briefly. "My husband died 2 years ago." Richard's expression softened. "Sorry for your loss," Eleanor changed the subject. "What brings you to Millbrook? You don't get many visitors, especially not in winter." "Business," he said, warming his hands around the chipped mug. "I'm developing a resort and recreation area near Lakeside Point. It should bring jobs and tourism to the region." Eleanor knew the spot, a beautiful overlook that locals had enjoyed for generations. That land has been undeveloped for as long as anyone can remember. "Progress comes to even the most remote places eventually," Richard said, though not unkindly. "I believe it will benefit the community." A sharp gust rattled the windows, and a new leak appeared above the small dining table. Eleanor quickly positioned another bucket. "Doesn't the village help with repairs?" Richard asked, frowning. Eleanor's pride flared. "Everyone has their own struggles. Besides, I manage fine." Richard looked like he wanted to argue, but was interrupted by another violent shiver. Eleanor realized his clothes were still soaked through. "You need dry clothes," she said, disappearing into the bedroom and returning with Thomas's things, a flannel shirt, wool sweater, and work pants. "These might be a bit short, but they're warm." While Richard changed, Eleanor made up the couch with blankets. "The storm won't let up until morning. You'll have to stay here tonight." When he emerged in Thomas's clothes, something twisted in Eleanor's chest. The shirt that had hung loose on Thomas's frame stretched across Richard's broader shoulders. He looked nothing like her husband, yet seeing his clothes worn by another man made Thomas's absence newly acute. "Thank you," Richard said, seemingly unaware of her discomfort. Not many people would take in a stranger these days. In Millbrook. "We look after each other," Eleanor replied, "and anyone else who needs help." As the night deepened, they talked by firelight, Richard of his life in the city, his company's projects across the country, Eleanor of the village, her patience, the changing seasons, two worlds colliding in the warmth of a crumbling cottage. While winter raged outside, asterisk morning arrived with blinding brightness, snow transforming Millbrook into a glistening wonderland. Eleanor woke early, habit driving her from bed despite having slept poorly on the old rocking chair, giving her guest the couch. She found Richard already awake, examining the cottage's damaged ceiling with a critical eye. "This place isn't safe," he said without preamble. "The structural support is compromised." Eleanor busied herself making breakfast. "It stood for 60 years. It'll manage another winter. Another heavy snow could collapse this roof," Richard insisted, accepting the coffee she offered. "Why do you stay?" The question, direct and invasive, caught Eleanor off guard. "It's my home. It's a hazard," Richard countered. "You care for an entire village, yet neglect yourself." Before Eleanor could respond, there was a knock at the door. Peter Blackwood, the village handyman, had come to check on her after the storm. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Richard. "Everything all right, Ellie?" he asked, his tone protective. "Is Mr. Harrington?" Eleanor explained. "His car went off the road in the storm." After Peter left, promising to help retrieve Richard's car, an uncomfortable silence settled between them. Richard finished his breakfast and changed back into his now dry clothes, transforming once more into the polished businessman who had stumbled into her life. "I need to check into the inn and make some calls," he said, "but I'd like to speak with you again, perhaps dinner tonight." Eleanor was startled by the invitation. "I have patients to see." "Tomorrow, then," Richard persisted. "It's important." Curiosity overrode her instinct to refuse. "Fine, tomorrow." The next evening, Richard arrived in a rental car, insisting on taking her to the Bradford Inn for dinner. The elegant dining room made Eleanor acutely aware of her simple dress and practical shoes. "Over surprisingly excellent food," Richard explained. His presence in Millbrook? Development will include a medical facility, he said. It's nothing elaborate, but staffed year-round. This area needs proper health care. That would make a difference, Eleanor admitted. But what does this have to do with me? Richard set down his fork. I've been watching you, Eleanor. How you care for everyone. How the village relies on you. But that cottage, he shook his head. It's not just unsafe. It's an injustice to someone who gives so much. Eleanor stiffened. Not, Richard interrupted. It's a proposition. I want to build you a proper home. I can't accept in exchange for a family, Richard finished. Eleanor's mouth fell open. Excuse me? Richard leaned forward. I have everything money can buy, Eleanor. Everything except what matters. I've built an empire, but come home to empty rooms. What I saw in you, your compassion, your strength, it's what I've been searching for. You barely know me, Eleanor protested, heart racing. I know enough, Richard replied. I'm not proposing marriage, not yet. I'm proposing a chance. Let me build you the home you deserve, and in return, let me be part of what you create there. The warmth, the purpose, the sense of belonging I saw in how you treat everyone around. You, by the time they left the inn, whispers had already begun. Eleanor felt eyes following them, knew tomorrow would bring questions she wasn't prepared to answer. At her door, Richard handed her his card. Think about it, he said. I'll be in Millbrook for 3 months overseeing the initial development. That's enough time to know if what I'm looking for exists here, ... with you. After he drove away, Eleanor stood frozen on her porch, the business card clutched in her hand, wondering if grief and loneliness had somehow conjured this strange dream more. If perhaps, in the most unexpected way, life was offering her a second chance. Asterisk, the whispers spread through Millbrook faster than Eleanor could have imagined. By noon the following day, 3 different patients had asked about that handsome developer who'd taken her to dinner. Olivia cornered her after school let out, demanding details. He wants to build you a house? In exchange for what exactly? Her friend asked, eyes wide with suspicion. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. He says he wants a family. Not children necessarily, but that sense of belonging. He says I make people feel like family, and you believe him? Olivia pressed. Men. Like that don't just wander into villages looking for connection, Ellie. They want something. The doubt lingered as Eleanor made her rounds, checking on patients and dodging curious questions. When she returned home, she found Richard waiting on her porch with blueprints. I haven't agreed to anything, she said immediately. Consider this. A proposal, then, he replied, unrolling the papers. Just look! Despite herself, Eleanor's breath caught. The design was beautiful, a cottage larger than her current one but still modest, with wide windows to capture sunlight, a covered porch, and most importantly, a dedicated space for treating patients. You included an examination room, she said softly. Richard nodded. The village needs it until the medical facility is built, and afterward it can become whatever you want. Over the next weeks, Richard's presence became a fixture in Millbrook. Construction began on both the development by the lake and Eleanor's cottage just down the road from her current home. She found herself drawn to the building site daily, watching as walls rose from foundation. You know what they're saying about you two? Peter warned her one afternoon, having appointed himself her unofficial protector. That you're selling yourself. For a house, Eleanor felt the sting of the words. People will talk regardless of what I do. Thomas wouldn't want. Thomas is gone, Eleanor cut him off, the words sharper than intended. And I've spent 2 years living for everyone but myself. Winter deepened, so did her connection with Richard. He joined her on house calls when his schedule allowed, carrying her medical bag through snow-covered lanes. She learned of his childhood in foster care, his drive to create something lasting. His loneliness, despite success, complications arose. When Richard's business partner, Vincent Wells, arrived unexpectedly. Unlike Richard, Vincent saw Millbrook as merely an investment opportunity. You're distracted. Eleanor overheard Vincent telling Richard one evening outside the inn. This nurse and this village were supposed to be temporary projects, not personal entanglements. Eleanor isn't a project, Richard replied coldly, and my personal life isn't your concern. Later, when Richard explained that Vincent wanted to expand the development beyond what they'd originally planned, potentially displacing several farms, Eleanor faced her first real test of trust. Would you stop it? She asked, watching his face. Carefully, Richard was quiet for a long moment. The board would fight me. But yes, I would. That night, lying in her leaking cottage for one of the last times, Eleanor finally admitted to herself what she'd been fighting for weeks. She was falling in love with Richard Harrington. The realization terrified her. Loving again meant risking loss again, opening wounds barely healed. Yet as she watched Richard the next day, patiently explaining construction details to curious village children, something in her heart shifted. Thomas would always be part of her, but perhaps there was room for new love, different, unexpected, but no less real. I think she told Richard that evening as they stood in the frame of what would be her new home. I'm ready to consider your proposal, all of it. His smile, bright with hope and something deeper, warmed her more thoroughly than any fire could. Asterisk. Spring arrived in Millbrook with a riot of wildflowers and renewed purpose. Eleanor's new cottage stood nearly complete, its fresh paint gleaming in the April sunshine. The village had gradually warmed to Richard's presence, particularly after he scaled back the lakeside development to preserve local farmland. It's a decision that cost him Vincent's partnership, but earned him respect from the community. It's beautiful, Eleanor said, walking through the finished rooms with Richard. Sunlight streamed through windows, warming wooden floors. The examination room was equipped better than she could have imagined, with modern medical supplies and comfortable furniture. 1 week until you can move in, Richard said, watching her face with evident pleasure. Any regrets? Eleanor shook her head. Over the past months, their relationship had evolved from cautious friendship to something deeper. Richard had proven himself not through grand gestures, but through consistency, showing up during emergencies, respecting her independence while offering support, building not just a house, but trust. What about you? She asked. This isn't exactly the family you imagined when you made your proposal. Richard took her hand. It's better. It's real. It's the week before moving day. Disaster struck. During a heavy rainstorm, Eleanor was called to a farm 5 miles away where a child had fallen from a hayloft. After treating the boy's broken arm, she headed home through the downpour, only to develop a fever by morning. Pneumonia, Olivia diagnosed grimly after finding Eleanor delirious, in bed, and severe. For days, Eleanor drifted between consciousness and fever dreams, vaguely aware of being moved, of voices around her. She dreamed of Thomas, of telling him it was all right to let her go, of his smile as he faded into light. When she finally woke, clearly, she was in a hospital room with Richard asleep in a chair beside her, his hand clutching hers, even in sleep. His face was unshaven, clothes rumpled as if he hadn't changed in days. You've been here the whole time, she whispered. Richard startled awake, relief flooding his features. 3 days. I thought his voice broke. I thought I was losing you before I'd truly found you. It's not that easy to get rid of me, Eleanor. Managed. When she was discharged a week later, Richard drove her not to the old cottage, which had partially collapsed during the storm, but to her new home. To her surprise, the porch was filled with flowers, and inside, the rooms were decorated with familiar items rescued from her old house Thomas's books. Her grandmother's quilt, photographs she'd thought lost. Olivia helped, Richard explained. Everyone did. They wanted you to come home to something familiar. Tears filled Eleanor's eyes as she moved through the rooms, touching objects that bridged her past and present. In the bedroom, above the fireplace, hung a portrait of Thomas that she'd kept beside her bed. You put him here? She said softly. Richard nodded. He'll always be part of you, Eleanor. I wouldn't change that. That evening, neighbors arrived with food and well wishes, filling the new house with conversation and laughter. Eleanor watched as Richard chatted easily with Mr. Finley about fishing, helped Mrs. Thornberry to the most comfortable chair, entertained children with stories. He belonged here now as much as she did. After everyone left, they sat together on the porch swing, watching stars appear above Millbrook. When I offered to build you a house in exchange for a family, Richard said quietly, I never imagined what that would really mean. I thought family was something you could construct, like a building. Leonard leaned against his shoulder. And now I know it's something that grows day by day. Through illness and health, through disagreements, in reconciliation, through making room for the past while building a future. He turned to face her fully. I love you, Eleanor Walsh. Not for what you can give me, but for who you are. Eleanor took his hand, feeling the strength and gentleness there. I love you too. And I think she smiled, the expression reaching her eyes fully for the first time in years. I think we've already built that family you wanted. As spring deepened into summer, house Richard built became truly a home filled with patients seeking care. Neighbors dropping by, children running through halls that echoed with laughter. And at its heart, two people who had found in each other not just love, but belonging, the most valuable foundation of all.